If your marriage turned into a chessboard, would you recognize the person sitting next to you, or the one moving all the pieces behind your back? That's the question Prince Harry may have never imagined he'd ask. Not as a soldier, not as a father, not even as the man who defied centuries of royal tradition for love. But what if love wasn't playing fair? Let me walk you into a scene. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It's late at night. The air inside the Montecito mansion is still. Not quiet, still. There's a difference. You know that feeling when silence doesn't calm you, it presses on your chest? That's where we find Prince Harry. In a room he helped design. In a house he helped build. Inside a life he thought he chose. And yet, on that night, it felt like the walls were whispering secrets he hadn't been told. Now pause for a moment. Think of someone you trust the most. The one who knows all your passwords, your triggers, your late-night habits. Now imagine discovering they might be more connected to someone else than they ever were to you. Not physically, not yet. Worse, emotionally, strategically, intellectually. What happens when the real betrayal isn't about bodies? It's about alliances. This is where the name Markus Anderson enters the story. You might have heard it in passing, maybe in a headline, a red carpet photo, a caption buried under a cheerful emoji. But behind that name is a web. Because Markus isn't just a friend. He's the man credited with introducing Meghan Markle to the upper echelons of the London elite. He's been called her fixer, her consigliera, and in some whispering circles, the gatekeeper to her rise. And yet, the world still calls him her best friend. Best friend? Or something much, much more calculated? This video is not just about scandal. It's about strategy. Because sometimes, the most dangerous games aren't played in bedrooms. They're played in boardrooms, chat threads, luxury lounges, and algorithm-curated fame. So what exactly did Harry find? What did he see, or read, or overhear that cracked the armor of a man who once called his wife his destiny? We won't give it all away just yet. But by the end of this video, you'll understand why that crack wasn't just about trust. It was about control. And why Harry, reportedly, didn't just get suspicious, he got furious. Now ask yourself, would you be okay if the person you loved most was building something behind your back? Because Harry's not just afraid of losing Meghan. He's afraid he never fully had her in the first place. Let's go back. Back to Toronto, 2014. Meghan is climbing. Not yet a household name. But she's hungry, driven, charismatic, and aware of the game. Enter Markus Anderson. A man so private, he has no public scandal footprint. A man so connected, he can get you into any Soho house on the planet. Soho House. You've heard of it. But have you ever wondered what really happens behind those velvet ropes? Because that's where Meghan and Markus thrived. They weren't just patrons. They were architects of access. And when Meghan began dating Prince Harry, guess who was already steps ahead? Markus was no stranger to London. No stranger to publicists, royal courtiers, or media gatekeepers. In fact, multiple insiders allege that it was Markus who arranged early private meetings between Meghan and key London players, well before the world caught on to the romance. Now pause. Ask yourself, is that what best friends do, or power brokers? And here's where the contradiction begins. Because Prince Harry thought he was choosing authenticity, simplicity, escape. But what if the world Meghan left behind never actually stayed behind? What if it moved in with them? What if it set up shop in their new life and never left? Because according to growing whispers from former staffers, producers, and anonymous insiders, Harry started noticing patterns. Same calls, same meetings, same voice in Meghan's ear when big decisions were being made. And that voice was often Markus. Let's play a hypothetical. You're Harry. You gave up your title, your homeland, your family's protection, all for a woman you believed stood alone. Now you're learning. She never stood alone. She always had a shadow strategist. Now, to be clear, we are not here to assert illicit romance. There's no direct evidence, yet, of anything physical. But what we're unpacking is possibly more threatening. An emotional alliance, a strategic duality, a narrative architecture where one man's rise became another man's unraveling. Because emotional betrayal doesn't always come in lingerie. Sometimes it comes in silence. Eye contact. Decisions made before you ever walk into the room. And for Harry, who's been raised to decode motives, alliances, and power dynamics within palace walls, this would be a living nightmare. Markus wasn't just an outsider. He was everywhere. From royal wedding seats, to LA power brunches, to Instagram posts that seemed innocent, until the captions started carrying deeper resonance. Harry's friends reportedly began raising eyebrows. Why does Markus have access to the same people, same projects, even same conversations as Harry? Was he advising Meghan behind the scenes? Was he positioning himself as her protector or her partner? Again, we don't claim what we can't prove, but we're here to ask the questions the mainstream won't. Because behind every modern fairy tale is a PR strategy and maybe a side script. And the side script? It always has a ghostwriter. One former insider, who claims to have worked on the fringes of Meghan and Harry's Archewell projects, described Markus as the invisible hand. Another, who worked in event coordination for Soho House, said, Markus knows how to make people disappear and make others appear golden. Golden? To whom? Let's revisit that Montecito moment. Harry. Silent room. Still air. He's holding a phone. Not his. He sees a thread. It's long. Intimate. Not sexual. Worse. Emotional. Tactical. Fluent. It reads like a partnership. One that doesn't include him. Inside jokes. Meeting times. Mentions of, we should tell him after the announcement. Tell him? Who's him? He is him. Suddenly, he's the outsider in his own marriage. And then, he finds the nickname. One he's never heard before. Used by Meghan. For Markus. A code. An emoji. A phrase from their Toronto days. The kind of name people use when the real one carries too much weight. That's when the blood drains from his face. Because it's not about cheating. It's about being replaced. Emotionally, intellectually, narratively. And that night, according to one close aide, Harry didn't sleep. He sat in the hallway for hours. No phone. No watch. Just one question echoing. Who's really writing my story? And maybe the better one. When did I stop being the co-author? Now before you jump to conclusions, there's more. A lot more. Because if this were just about Harry's paranoia, the story would have stopped there. But it didn't. Because soon after that moment, other things started surfacing. Private meetings. Deleted messages. Curious overlaps in travel dates. And a whisper from a high-level British source claiming the palace had warned him once. Warned him what? That's what we're unpacking next. Because Markus Anderson might just be the most powerful man you've never heard of. And Harry? He's starting to realize the games weren't just dirty. They were deeply, meticulously orchestrated. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the first sign of betrayal wasn't a lie? What if it was a pattern? Not explosive, not dramatic, just consistent. Too consistent. Because in most relationships, you don't suddenly look for a third person. You feel it. In the silence. The shift in tone. The way someone turns their head a second too late, or puts their phone face down one too many times. For Prince Harry, that shift didn't come with shouting matches or scandalous paparazzi photos. It came as a whisper named Markus Anderson. So, who exactly is Markus Anderson? If this were just about friendship, we wouldn't be here. But this isn't that. Markus isn't some anonymous figure plucked from Meghan's past. He's been orbiting her world like a satellite since the pre-Harry days. When she was still building her brand, climbing the ladder, and cultivating the exact image that would one day dazzle the world. And Markus? He wasn't watching from the sidelines. He was designing the game board. Now let's rewind. The year is 2014. Meghan Markle is starring in Suits, living in Toronto, and quickly becoming a name in fashion circles. But behind the scenes, she's strategizing something bigger, something long-term. And then enters Markus. Not a romantic partner. Not a co-star. Something much more dangerous. A social architect. Markus Anderson, a senior executive at Soho House, doesn't just know the right people. He curates them. He's the velvet-roped VIP list in human form. Quiet, well-dressed, and impossibly connected. At a time when Meghan needed elite exposure, invitations, introductions, and high society access, Markus had the keys. Some call it luck. Others, a calculated friendship with mutual benefit. The question is, was it ever just friendship? Because from the very beginning, Markus didn't act like a casual friend. He traveled with her. He advised her. He allegedly helped craft certain press strategies before the royal engagement even happened. Now think about that. Long before Harry entered the picture, Markus was the one rehearsing talking points, orchestrating introductions, and, if insiders are to be believed, positioning Meghan for high-powered connections in both London and New York. You don't just accidentally become that vital. You get trusted. And trust, in Hollywood and royalty, is more valuable than love. When Meghan began dating Harry in secret, who was in the know? Markus. When she needed a place for covert rendezvous, Markus arranged it at Soho House. When the couple wanted to avoid paparazzi and stage romantic getaways, Markus reportedly helped. So let's pause here. We're not saying he was the third wheel. We're saying he might have been driving the car. Now here's the twist. While Harry believed he was crafting a private, intimate, against-the-odds romance, someone else was watching. Someone else may have been coordinating, steering. That brings us to the bigger question. Who was really running the narrative? Let me ask you, have you ever been in a relationship where your partner's best friend felt a little too involved? Where you started wondering if you were dating them too? Because in some ways, Harry wasn't just dating Meghan. He was dating Meghan and Markus's dynamic. And let's be honest, men like Harry don't often question these things. He grew up in a palace where hierarchies were assumed, not questioned, where courtiers made decisions and you accepted them. But Markus wasn't a courtier. He was something Harry hadn't been trained to spot. A modern-day power player, draped in friendship but fueled by control. Now flash forward. It's 2016. Meghan and Harry are official. The tabloids are swirling. The world wants to know who she is, where she came from, and whether she's good enough. Guess who's still by her side? Markus. He appears at events. He's seen dining with her in private photos. He's spotted at the royal wedding itself, seated in a place usually reserved for family or political allies. Odd, isn't it? A club executive, sitting near foreign dignitaries? Unless, of course, he wasn't just a guest. He was an operator. And as Meghan transitioned from actress to duchess to global influencer, one figure remained a quiet constant. Not Harry. Markus. Which brings us to Harry's internal storm. Because for a man who gave up everything, his homeland, his military ties, his brotherhood with William, he believed he was building a two-person life. A clean break from institutional control. But instead, he found himself surrounded by another form of control, one he didn't understand. One that came wearing Gucci loafers and whispering PR strategy over glasses of wine. Let me paint a picture for you. Every time a major decision was being discussed, Netflix deal, Spotify fallout, public appearances, Harry noticed something. Meghan would often say, "Let me run that by someone." He assumed it was a lawyer, a manager, a publicist. But time and time again, the feedback returned with Markus's fingerprints. Subtle, non-confrontational, strategic. And eventually, Harry began connecting dots. Dots that made him uncomfortable. Because it wasn't just what was said. It was the tone. The assumption that Harry would eventually come around. That he'd see things the way they saw it. Wait, they? When did it become they? Harry had married for freedom. But now he was realizing freedom wasn't the endgame. Influence was. And Markus? He had influence in spades. Now let's talk symbolism. In monarchy, optics are everything. But in celebrity circles, optics are the currency. Markus understood this. Intimately. Soho House isn't just a place to drink overpriced cocktails. It's where deals are whispered, photos are staged, relationships are marketed. Meghan knew this. She played it well. But Harry? He was late to the party, and when he arrived, he realized the guest list was already curated. And at the top? Markus. This isn't jealousy. Let's be clear. This is about role confusion. When you're the husband, you expect to be the primary confidant, the main partner. But what happens when someone else is already filling that space? Not romantically, strategically, emotionally, consistently. And it wasn't just Harry noticing. Close friends, according to whispers, began mentioning it too. Why is Markus always around? Why does he know more than the staff? Why does he answer questions Meghan should be answering? These aren't questions you ask out loud. Until it's too late. And for Harry, it was too late when he stumbled across the first breadcrumb. A meeting invite. Not meant for him. A dinner, scheduled in LA, where Meghan and Markus were set to discuss an unfolding narrative. Those were the words. Unfolding narrative. Who talks like that? Unless they're crafting something. And why wasn't Harry informed? He confronted Meghan. She brushed it off. Just catching up, she said. Nothing serious. But the phrase stuck. Unfolding narrative. That night, Harry barely slept. And the next morning, when Meghan left for Pilates, he opened her laptop. Not to snoop. To protect himself. What he found, according to one insider, was a Google Doc, shared only between Meghan and Markus, titled Summer Strategy. Inside, paragraphs, plans, public messaging, and several lines that began with, Harry will, Harry should, Harry can be positioned as. Can you imagine? Reading yourself as a prop in someone else's script? That's the moment something snapped. Not loudly, not violently, internally, quietly, irreversibly. And it wasn't just the document. It was the tone, the assumption that he'd comply. And when he tried to bring it up again, Meghan's response was cold. It's just planning. But planning what? And with whom? That's the question that wouldn't leave his head. Because when a man starts asking who his wife really turns to in private, it's not about love anymore. It's about power. And Harry was about to learn, painfully, that power isn't always worn like a crown. Sometimes it's worn like a shadow. And that shadow? It was always just 2 steps behind him. But what came next would drag that shadow straight into the spotlight. Some friendships survive distance. Some friendships survive fame. But others? They survive because they were never built on spontaneity to begin with. They were built on leverage. And in Prince Harry's world, leverage isn't just influence. Leverage is the ability to shift public opinion, open doors money can't, and control a narrative long after your name disappears from headlines. So let me ask you this. Have you ever thought someone was helping you until you realized they were directing you? Because that's where this chapter begins. Not with romance, not with a confession, not even with an argument, but with a realization. The kind that creeps in slowly, then hits suddenly. Like realizing the person driving your escape plan is the same person locking the route. Now, let's talk about Markus Anderson's role in Meghan Markle's ecosystem, always understood here in the context of public rumors, anonymous insider claims, and narrative interpretation, not verified fact. Markus wasn't publicly hired as her brand manager. The palace never released statements confirming him as a strategist. But he occupied a strange, unofficial position in her orbit that many journalists, royal watchers, and former Sussex associates have described in interviews or memoir anecdotes as intimately involved, quietly influential, or impossibly present in decision streams. And presence, when persistent, becomes a de facto role, even without a job title. Let's get a few dynamics straight. In Harry's mind, Meghan was the independent disruptor. Markus was the loyal Toronto confidant. In Markle world rumors, Meghan was the rising principal. Markus was the connector, the one who mapped introductions to elites before deals happened, the one who helped her navigate membership circles, media rooms, crisis PR pathways, and soft power optics. And that contrast is the tension we're unpacking here. Because there are friends who carry boxes during a house move. And then there are friends who tell you which house, which street, which timing, and which windows get photographed. Which one do you think Markus was? Let's rewind again to the crucial psychological crossroads. Harry learned relationships through institutions. Eden, the army, the monarchy. Every major alliance in his life came with a defined hierarchy. You obeyed the system first, your partner second, your inner circle third, if they were earned by family lineage or military sacrifice. But Hollywood's inner circles work differently. They don't care about lineage. They care about network capital. And Markus had network capital early. Soho House, Toronto launchpads, London lounges, LA dinners where producers, celebrities, and diplomats mix without name tags. Now imagine a royal prince stepping into that. To him, those rooms looked like chaos. To Markus, those rooms were architecture. Harry interpreted Markus's loyalty as emotional support. Warm dinners, private check-ins, trusted introductions before the paparazzi boom. But rumors allege that behind those warmth signals, Markus was also mapping media reactions, curating talking points, advising who gets access to what, helping Meghan vet her relationships by opportunity alignment, and quietly influencing branding direction even into the Montecito years. Again, these are public allegations or narrative analysis drawn from non-verified insider sensibilities, not proven fact. Now here's the contradiction. Meghan publicly positioned herself as someone who escaped the machine. But Marcus, according to rumor narratives, was a machine of connections. The irony tastes sharp, doesn't it? The world thought Meghan and Harry rejected institutional maps. They didn't realize they might have adopted a different one. A modern, members-only one. Let me ask you something honestly. Do you think the palace was the only place Harry could be maneuvered by advisors? Or was Marcus showing him a new form of court, without the crown? Because courts evolve, and the most powerful courtiers are the ones who never need public appointment. Marcus didn't need a crown. He had phones of producers, trust of networks, access to members-only sanctuaries, algorithmic optics literacy, and a deep understanding that silence is strategy until announcement is timing. Now, what about Meghan? Where does she sit in this alliance equation? Publicly independent, yes, but privately tethered to at least one trusted operator for years. And that's important to understand about Meghan's psychological scaffolding. When she uprooted her life to join the royal family, she didn't sever her support systems. She ported them forward. Marcus, from rumor analysis, remained one of the longest-lived constants in that support system. Pre-Duchess, Duchess, post-Duchess, global brand era. Now, Harry didn't just marry a woman. He married an ecosystem. And ecosystems have power nodes. Marcus was one of them. But when Harry saw him as a friend, he might have underestimated the influence column. Let's break down the beats visually. Picture it. Soho House, Toronto launches. Marcus introduces Meghan to cinephiles, fashion insiders, PR architects. Primary motive? Unknown. But results? Elite access. Soho House, London. He helps Meghan transition into rooms where royals, diplomats, influencers, news execs, and Hollywood names sit without clear boundaries. Montecito. He remains in the inner loop for Archwell conversations, according to multiple anonymous claims by people claiming proximity to production pipelines. Again, rumor context, not verified fact. Do employees plan engagements with Google Docs about positioning a prince unless they have a role? This is where Harry began to realize his blind spot. Because if Meghan's strategist was planning the moves, then who exactly was Harry when the plan began long before his consent? Was he the co-author? Or the distribution channel? Here's the emotional beat. Harry entered the relationship believing Meghan valued authenticity. And maybe she did. But authenticity doesn't block strategy. Strategy protects authenticity and amplifies it. And Marcus amplifies well. Which brings us to Harry's simmer, but rising emotional state. Imagine discovering that the person you trusted to help your wife navigate fame was advising fame itself how to navigate you. That's jarring, isn't it? This wasn't about physical betrayal, yet in public rumor narratives. It was about role displacement. Loyalty is confusing when a strategist wears it like friendship. It feels warm until you realize it might be influence. So let me ask you, do you think Harry was slowly interpreting strategy as betrayal only because he hadn't recognized strategy as a presence originally? Because when you name something dirty games, it might just mean I wasn't told about the rules. Here's another contradiction. Marcus is so private, there are hardly any interviews confirming his role in Meghan's life. And yet, his name keeps surfacing because of his proximity to Meghan for years, his enduring seat within club elite infrastructure, his ability to curate access rooms, his strange omnipresence during Sussex decision overlap years, and Harry's own alleged discovery that someone else might have had earlier narrative influence capital than he did. Again, allegations and narrative interpretation, not proven fact. Now let's inject the analogy. Imagine a moving company. A friend carries boxes. A strategist carries the route, timing, optics, announcements, introductions, and public interpretation structure. And suddenly, Harry may have realized the person helping Meghan move wasn't carrying ladders. He was carrying the map. But here's the tension device. When Harry gave up his titles, stepped back from royal duties, and said, "We want privacy," he didn't realize privacy in influencer ecosystems still moves through networks, not institutions. Networks. And Meghan already had one. That network included Marcus. Now, that discovery wasn't just uncomfortable psychologically. It was destabilizing identity-wise, because Harry knew how to rebel against castles, not clubs. And clubs, unlike castles, don't have public protocol. They have loyalty signals. Signals he hadn't decoded in time. Which leads us to this psychological beat. Harry didn't explode because something physical was confirmed. He exploded because influence didn't need confirmation. It only needed persistence. Because Marcus had persistence. And persistence becomes a role, even without name tags. Now let's talk emotional resonance. Meghan and Harry co-authored a story publicly as rebellious royals. But insiders allege Marcus co-authored the first chapters of Meghan's elite access story long before Harry entered. Again, narrative rumor context, not proven. That pushes us to the next question to ignite curiosity. Is emotional betrayal louder than strategic betrayal? Or does strategic betrayal just take longer to recognize? Because strategic betrayal hides inside logistics. You don't see it until you trace the loop. And Harry, according to rumor contexts, was just starting to trace loops. Another question for you. Does a strategist attached to a powerful public figure inevitably look like a threat when a prince becomes emotionally threatened? And when did a prince stop being the only power player in his marriage? That's where we end. Not with a reveal, but with a psychological tipping point. Harry was raised in royal strategy. He didn't realize he might have entered Markle strategy. This is where the story starts to escalate. Because what comes after pattern recognition? Reaction. And Harry was about to react. But not the way you expect. Because storms that brew quietly break kingdoms differently. And that storm was about to break. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It didn't come with sirens. No red flags. No blaring scandal. No hotel receipts, lipstick stains, or screaming matches behind closed doors. It came quietly, calmly, through timing, through tone, through omission. That's what makes this chapter so dangerous. Because when betrayal wears a mask of normalcy, when it smiles through strategy and laughs at the right jokes, you don't spot it until you're already part of its script. The question is, was Harry ever really in control of his own narrative, or was he always 3 steps behind? Let's be clear about something. This isn't a story of cheating. This is something deeper, sharper, more insidious. This is about the architecture of influence. And influence, when wielded by the right hands, can be cleaner than scandal and more damaging than lies. We're not here to point fingers without proof. We're here to map the invisible strings. And one of those strings might have run straight through Markus Anderson. Let's build the scene. We've already established Marcus was a quiet powerhouse in Meghan's rise. Introductions, invitations, social legitimacy, a buffer between actress and royalty, a bridge between private ambition and public transformation. But how exactly did those games stay so invisible? Simple. They were played in plain sight. Because in today's fame economy, the most powerful moves don't happen behind closed doors. They happen on social media, in press releases, at curated events. In who gets tagged, who gets credited, who gets photographed. And this is where Harry began to feel the floor shift beneath him. Because while he was used to press ambushes and tabloid slander, he wasn't trained to detect something subtler. Narrative engineering, not gossip. Positioning. Let me break it down. In the royal world, narratives are handled by palace press officers, royal correspondents, and centuries of precedent. In the Hollywood sphere, narratives are handled by strategists, image consultants, PR syndicates, social curators, trusted friends who happen to manage introductions and headlines at the same time. And Marcus? He operated in that latter system. Now ask yourself this. What happens when 2 systems collide? When a man raised in monarchy marries into media strategy without realizing it? You get confusion. You get power dissonance. And eventually, you get paranoia. Let's revisit a key shift in the timeline. The Sussexes announced their exit from royal duties in January 2020. The world explodes. The British press goes wild. The monarchy reels. And amidst all of it, Marcus is seen, not in front of cameras, but near every major Sussex milestone. Advising, assisting, observing. According to whispers from former staffers and media insiders, Marcus was involved in soft strategizing, not dictating plans, but massaging them into shape. And Harry? He began to notice things. The same phrases in Meghan's emails echoed in public interviews. Plans he thought were private began surfacing in indirect coverage. Words he spoke behind closed doors showed up, paraphrased, in narrative-shaping articles. Coincidence? Or leakage? Harry had seen the palace leak before. That was nothing new. But this felt different. This wasn't leaking to hurt. It was leaking to steer. It wasn't sabotage. It was subtle framing. Now imagine being Harry. You stepped away from the crown for autonomy, and now you're realizing someone else has been guiding the public story without your full awareness. Let's pause and break the emotional beat. This isn't just suspicion. It's the kind of disorientation that hits when you realize your partner may be operating within a layered alliance. Not necessarily romantic, but narratively codependent. Because here's the big twist. Markus and Meghan weren't just friends. They were partners in brand building, according to multiple alleged insiders. They thought alike. They planned alike. And their idea of control wasn't about domination. It was about craftsmanship. That kind of alignment is powerful. To outsiders, harmless. To Harry, terrifying. Because if your partner is aligning with someone else on every major decision, someone who predates you, understands the rules of this newer world better than you, what does that leave you? A passenger. A piece on a chessboard. A symbol. Not a strategist, just a symbol. Now here's where it gets messy. Harry tried to speak up. He raised his concerns to Meghan, reportedly. He questioned the repeated involvement, the repeated presence. And according to one unverified insider, he was met with defensiveness, not transparency. Markus has been there since the beginning, Meghan allegedly snapped. He's done more for me than anyone in that palace ever did. That sentence stung. More than anyone in the palace? What about Harry? What about the man who left the palace for her? The man who traded his entire royal identity to build a life outside the institution, only to feel like he'd stepped into a new one, built by someone else. And just like that, the rupture began. It didn't explode. It cracked. Because emotional betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's administrative. Here's an example. In early 2022, the Sussexes were reportedly finalizing plans for a documentary deal. Harry assumed the project was still in early ideation, until he discovered Meghan had already held 2 private pitch meetings, with Markus on the call. Harry wasn't furious at the deal. He was furious at the exclusion. Why was Markus there? Why wasn't Harry told? Why were certain themes, his trauma, his childhood, already being mapped in a docuseries that bore his name? The answers didn't come quickly. And when they did, they were packaged in a now familiar phrase. You were busy. We needed to move. We. There it was again. That casual we that excluded him. That subconscious alliance. And what happens when the we doesn't include you anymore? You become the subject, not the co-creator. And that realization breaks something deeper than trust. It breaks agency. But Harry wasn't just dealing with an emotional rift. He was dealing with optics. Because the world still saw him as the leading man in the Sussex saga. They didn't know the quiet rooms. They didn't know the strategists behind the speeches, the captions, the event placements, the narrative arcs. And behind all those, Markus's name kept appearing. Never in bold. Never in press releases. Always in the BCC. Always in the guest list margins. Always just close enough to be relevant, just far enough to deny. And that is narrative power. That's how the hardest games are played. In plain sight, under the guise of friendship, disguised as support. And if Harry dared to question it too publicly, he'd look paranoid. He'd look insecure. He'd look ungrateful. So he stayed quiet. Until he couldn't anymore. Because the final straw wasn't a meeting. It wasn't a message. It wasn't even Markus himself. It was a pattern. A pattern Harry started seeing in every decision. Every branding choice. Every creative direction Meghan pushed forward. It always looped back to Markus. His vision. His influence. His wording. And that's when Harry snapped. Not with violence. Not with scandal. But with withdrawal. He pulled back from production calls. He delayed interviews. He stopped appearing at events where Markus was present. Because what do you do when you realize you're not just being sidelined? You're being packaged. And being packaged is worse than being betrayed. Because betrayal is temporary. Packaging, that becomes your legacy. And Harry, raised as a prince, a soldier, a royal rebel, was suddenly being reshaped into a narrative product in a world someone else built before he ever showed up. He wasn't the architect. He was the angle, the brand pillar. And somewhere deep inside, that realization was more painful than any tabloid headline. Because tabloid lies you can fight. Narrative co-optation, that takes your name and calls it authenticity. So he began to watch. Closely. Quietly. He looked for timestamps. Meeting overlaps. Phrase repetition between Marcus's alleged emails and Meghan's public quotes. And what he found was enough to make him retreat, emotionally, if not physically. Because the palace had once told him to watch out for those who whisper behind your back. But no one ever warned him about those who whisper with your partner while smiling to your face. And that's where we leave this chapter. Not with a scream, not with an affair, but with a quiet realization that sometimes the dirtiest games aren't hidden. They're performed right in front of you, as if daring you to finally open your eyes. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. There's a difference between knowing something's wrong and knowing someone is crafting it that way. One is intuition, the other is investigation. And Prince Harry had been trained in both. Because being a husband teaches you how to feel, but being a prince, that teaches you how to decode. And the moment Harry stopped reacting like a husband and started thinking like a royal, that's when things began to unravel. Let's talk instincts. In most marriages, when something feels off, you talk it out. You cry. You argue. Maybe you bury it. Maybe you pretend it's just a phase. But Harry wasn't married to most. He was married to Meghan Markle. And the Meghan Harry fell in love with was spontaneous, brave, intelligent, an outsider like him. But the Meghan he now lived with? She was evolving into something else. A brand. A strategy. A vision that sometimes felt too polished, too prepared. And as that vision expanded, so did one name in the background. Markus Anderson. Let's go back to the shift. The early days were easy. Messy, sure, but easy. Harry and Meghan against the world. An engagement that shocked the monarchy. A wedding that blended royalty with Hollywood. A baby. An escape. But somewhere after Montecito, the story stopped feeling like theirs. It started feeling like a rollout. Announcements were being pre-planned. Projects dropped with military precision. Hashtags coordinated. Crisis responses drafted before crises even erupted. That's not love. That's not marriage. That's a campaign. And if Harry was being honest, he couldn't tell when the campaign started or if it ever really ended. Because behind every move was a trace, the tone, a whisper. And the whisper sounded like Marcus. Let's stop pretending this was invisible. You don't have someone as involved as Markus Anderson, someone allegedly seated next to you at strategy meetings, mentioned in text threads, pulled into private events, and not begin to notice when their fingerprints start showing up on everything. According to one source, Harry began noticing overlaps in phrases. Meghan would say something in passing. Optics, messaging rhythm, brand anchor. Terms Harry had never heard her use before. Then, in a Google Doc tied to a media campaign, those exact same terms appeared, authored by someone else. It wasn't Meghan. It was Marcus. Now pause. How would you feel? You're building a life with someone. You believe every major decision is a mutual process. Then suddenly it's not. You find out that the person you married is taking cues from someone else. Not romantically, but strategically. You start to realize that maybe, just maybe, you weren't the co-author. You were the subject. And here's the kicker. She didn't even hide it. Because Marcus wasn't a secret. He wasn't in the shadows. He was on the guest lists. In the credits. In the background of candid photos. Not hiding. Just embedded. Like a line of code in a beautifully designed website, running the whole system, but never flashing on the screen. And Harry? He was the user, not the developer. That's when paranoia creeps in. Not the wild, frantic kind. The quiet kind. The kind where you start replaying past conversations. The kind where a laugh suddenly feels rehearsed. Where a compliment sounds copied. Where you start wondering if the fights weren't fights at all, just misaligned scripts. Harry started digging. Not obsessively. Not at first. Just questioning. Who wrote that post? Why did we decline that event? Who knew about the book title before I did? Each question was met with calm explanations. It's just business. It's just PR. It's just easier when someone handles the boring stuff. But boring stuff included his voice, his pain, his trauma, his relationships with his family. None of that was boring. And when Harry finally confronted Meghan with what he was seeing, what he was feeling, he was met with a familiar, cutting phrase. Why are you always looking for something that isn't there? And that's the moment the husband fell away. That's when the prince returned. Because that's gaslighting. Plain and simple. And a prince doesn't get gaslit without responding. So Harry did what every royal does when they smell manipulation. He started asking questions quietly. He asked staffers. He asked production assistants. He asked PR liaisons, lawyers, social consultants. And what he found sent chills down his spine. Markus's name was everywhere. Not officially, but behind the scenes. He was in the loop. Every deal, every leak, every event. He wasn't listed as handler, manager, or coordinator. But he was CC'd. He was consulted. He was trusted. More than Harry? That's the question he couldn't shake. Because it wasn't about one conversation anymore. It was a pattern of decisions where Harry was told after, not before. And worse, sometimes not at all. Let's talk about the cut profile. The infamous 2022 interview where Meghan opened up about their royal exit, the breakdown with the firm, and life in America. Harry didn't preview the piece. He didn't shape the narrative. He was barely mentioned. And when he asked about the interview ahead of publication, he was reportedly told, "It's nothing you haven't heard before." But when it dropped, it was everything he hadn't heard before. And guess who had been in contact with the magazine's editorial team in the weeks leading up to it? That's right, Markus. Not as a source, not as a contributor, but allegedly as a friend of the couple. But which couple? That's the question. Because by now, even Harry began wondering, was this ever a two-person marriage? Or had it always been a three-person campaign? It's not about physical intimacy. It's about emotional real estate. And someone else was living rent-free inside the structure Harry thought he was building with his wife. Let's hit the metaphor. You marry someone and build a house together. But over time, you notice some of the furniture you didn't pick. Some of the blueprints don't look like yours. Some of the doors are locked, and you don't have the keys. Then one day, you find out the architect had another partner on the side. Not romantically, strategically. That's what Harry was waking up to. And that's why he stopped sleeping. Because when you realize someone's being engineered, when their voice doesn't sound like theirs anymore, when their moves feel automated, you don't blame them. You blame the one holding the remote. And in Harry's growing suspicion, that remote had Markus's fingerprints. But he couldn't prove it. He couldn't say, "Markus is manipulating my wife." Because there were no voicemails, no confessions, just access. Access to Meghan. Access to her plans. Access to her mind. Access Harry was slowly losing. And in a relationship built on rebellion, that felt like the ultimate betrayal. Because Harry had already given up his world. Now he was losing his grip on the new one. And what's more devastating than realizing you escaped one institution, only to get absorbed into another? But this one wasn't run by the crown. It was run by someone with no title at all. And that's what broke Harry. Not anger. Displacement. The feeling that he wasn't the protagonist anymore. He was the supporting actor in someone else's script. And the more he questioned it, the more Meghan pulled away. She didn't see the threat. She saw a friend. She saw loyalty. But Harry saw something else. He saw strategy. And he was tired of being strategized. That's when he stopped playing along. And when Harry stops playing along, the narrative collapses. He refused media rehearsals. He backed out of coordinated red carpets. He canceled a high-profile podcast interview last minute, without explanation. Because silence was his only power left. He didn't need to scream. He just needed to stop. Stop validating. Stop showing up. Stop playing the part written for him. But what happens when a man raised to follow protocol decides to dismantle the one system no one talks about? The emotional one. That's where we go next. Because it wasn't just Harry watching anymore. Other people were starting to notice. And what came next would not only shake the inner circle, it would threaten to expose the very infrastructure behind the Sussex story. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a hidden camera. It wasn't a screaming match that shook the walls of their Montecito mansion. It was something smaller, quieter, but infinitely more destructive. It was a notification. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't announce itself with thunder. It whispers. It buzzes. It flashes across a screen for 3 seconds. Just long enough to derail everything you thought was real. That's how Prince Harry's world began to break. Not with betrayal. With a preview. Let's rewind the scene. It's a Saturday morning. Golden sunlight spilling through the kitchen. Archie is playing in the next room. Lilibet is still asleep. Meghan is heading out for yoga, phone in hand, Starbucks order memorized. Harry is barefoot, sipping coffee, running over talking points for an upcoming Archwell roundtable. It's peaceful, at least on the surface. Meghan places her phone on the counter face up. Not unusual. But something is already different. Harry sees it, notices it, that tension in her hands. The microsecond hesitation. She smiles and kisses his forehead. I'll be back in an hour. And just like that, she's gone. Then the phone lights up. He shouldn't look. He doesn't want to. But it buzzes again, and again, and again. 3 messages, all previewed on the lock screen. Markus Anderson. The name alone stabs. Not because it's new. Markus has always been around. But because Harry had recently been cut out of 3 major decisions where Markus's influence was all over them. And now, this. The message previews aren't long. But they don't have to be. Because sometimes, just a phrase is enough to start the fire. Let's keep it the way we framed it. Still think we hold on until after he commits. Remind him to stay light on specifics. London. That was it. Nothing explicit. Nothing scandalous. No affair. No confession. No secrets you could print in a tabloid. But everything about those 3 lines made Harry's stomach drop. Let's keep it the way we framed it. We? Not you and me. Not her and I. We. Still think we hold on until he commits. He. Harry. He was being discussed in third person. In private. In partnership. With a man who wasn't him. Remind him to stay light on specifics. London. London? What specifics? What was being hidden? What angle was being massaged? The messages weren't damning in content. They were damning in context. Because in those short previews, Harry didn't just see strategy. He saw collusion. He saw 2 people. One his wife, the other the man always described as just a friend, operating a narrative behind his back. And in that moment, something snapped. Not in rage. In clarity. Because this wasn't the first time he felt it. It was just the first time he saw it confirmed. Let's zoom out emotionally. Harry, the rebel prince, had always prided himself on following his gut. He left the royal family because of it. He spoke out because of it. He rebuilt his life around it. And now, that same gut was telling him something else. That he was being positioned. That somewhere in the carefully crafted Sussex image, he'd become a product. And who was co-producing it? Markus. The same man who smiled at Christmas. The same man who toasted at their wedding. The same man Harry once thanked for protecting Meghan when I couldn't be there. And now, he was seeing how that protection mutated into management. Now let's break the psychological contradiction. Harry didn't suspect a sexual affair. That would have been simple. Scandalous, sure, but clean. What he saw was worse. It was emotional outsourcing. It was narrative control. It was seeing your life co-engineered by someone outside the marriage. Without your input. Let's take a breath. You ever been in a relationship where you suddenly realize you're not the first person your partner shares news with? Not romantically, but emotionally, professionally, strategically? That's betrayal of a different kind. And Harry felt it like a knife wrapped in a handshake. Let's dive deeper. In the days following the message previews, Harry went quiet. He didn't confront Meghan. Not immediately. Because confrontation needs confirmation. Instead, he watched. And what he saw broke him even further. Meetings he wasn't invited to. Documents that referenced him indirectly. When H signs off, positioning H as anchor. Language that removed him from the emotional equation and inserted him into the branding. He wasn't the partner. He was the pitch. And somewhere between wedding vows and Netflix trailers, the man who left everything behind had become a bullet point. Here's the emotional spike. One night, Harry opened a shared cloud folder used for Archwell planning. He was looking for fundraising stats. Instead, he found a draft deck for an upcoming Meghan speaking engagement. Nothing crazy. Until he saw the speaker notes. And in the final slide, beneath bullet points on resilience, independence, and courage, was a line. Optional anecdote. H encouraged the move, but it was always my path. Now to an audience, that's empowerment. But to Harry, that was erasure. Because that move, the royal exit, the press storm, the attacks, it almost destroyed him. He lost family. He lost friends. He lost a nation. And now, he was an optional anecdote. Like a footnote in someone else's success story. A supporting character in a brand that bore his name. It was Markus all over again. Because Markus didn't need headlines. He had access. He didn't need to steal Meghan away. He just had to anchor her vision more deeply than Harry could. And that realization? It was the final crack. Now you may be asking, why didn't Harry just confront her? Why didn't he pull the plug? Why didn't he walk? Simple. Because he still loved her. And love, as twisted as it becomes, doesn't vanish in betrayal. It just fragments. It curls into the cracks and keeps you up at night, whispering, maybe it's not what it looks like. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I am just insecure. Maybe Marcus really is just a friend. But gut instincts don't lie. And the gut had spoken. So Harry began preparing. Not for divorce. Not for scandal. For truth. Because if he couldn't prove it, he could uncover it. He started noting timestamps, tracking meetings, watching who showed up on what calls, and most importantly, listening. And what he heard confirmed it all. Not in words, in patterns, in behaviors, in the silence between conversations. That's when he knew. He wasn't losing Meghan. He was watching her transition. From partner to principal. From wife to entity. From emotional companion to curated figurehead. And Marcus? He wasn't taking her from Harry. He was redefining who she needed Harry to be. Not the man. Not the husband. But the accessory. The brand extension. The emotional subplot in her arc. And that was something Harry never agreed to. Because while he may have left the crown behind, he didn't trade his identity for placement. That's why the messages broke him. Because they weren't just words on a screen. They were a preview. A preview of the moment he realized. He was no longer the person being consulted. He was the person being managed. And the next step he took wouldn't be whispered. Wouldn't be strategized. Wouldn't be previewed in a text thread. It would be loud. Because the truth had finally arrived. Not in conversation. Not in argument. But in a notification. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Ever notice how after someone breaks your trust, everything they say starts to sound like a script? That's the effect of betrayal. Not just the wound, but the echo. Suddenly, compliments feel rehearsed. Silences feel loaded. Every message isn't just a message, it's a performance. And once Prince Harry saw the motive, every conversation, every glance, every phone call felt like it came with a muzzle. Not the kind that silences you out loud. The kind that hides what's really being said underneath the noise. This chapter is about the moment Harry stopped hearing what was said and started hearing what was being left out. Let's paint the picture. It's a Tuesday afternoon. Post-yoga, post-press release, post-smiling for camera's energy. Meghan walks into the kitchen holding a cup of ginger tea. Did you get a chance to review the segment cut for the next doc episode? She asks. Harry nods. It's fine, he says. But inside, he's screaming. Because that segment, it includes a soundbite. Meghan talking about the emotional toll of palace isolation, referencing the moment Harry decided they had to leave the UK. Except he hadn't. Not exactly. He remembers that moment differently. He remembers her pushing first, her saying she couldn't take it, her sobbing, her trembling hands, her whispering, I need to get out. He remembers holding her and saying, then we'll go, whatever it takes. Not a decision, a response, a rescue. But in the final cut, it's spun. It's positioned as his push. And worse, Marcus helped shape the edit, according to an unnamed producer familiar with the Archwell content pipeline. Let's be very clear again for context. These are allegations, insider claims, not confirmed by the Sussexes. But the pattern? It's what matters. Because once Harry saw that motive, the need to frame him as the driver of the exit, everything else began to sound scripted, controlled, muzzled. Let me ask you, have you ever started questioning whether someone's checking with someone else before they speak to you? Not about cheating, but about framing. That's what Harry felt. Every sentence started to feel post-produced. And the muzzle? It wasn't covering her voice. It was muting his. Because the more this story advanced, the Netflix episodes, the interviews, the books, the more Harry noticed something chilling. He was saying less, but being quoted more. He was giving fewer interviews. But the image of him was everywhere. In articles, in profiles, in documentaries, as the brave husband, the damaged prince, the hero who walked away. Sounds noble, right? But the problem is, it wasn't always true. Not in the way it was told. Not in the order it happened. And most importantly, not with his consent. Because Harry didn't walk away from the crown like a general tossing down his sword. He dragged himself out, bleeding, confused, conflicted. It was messy, but the way it was being framed, it was clean. Too clean. And when things start getting too clean in public, you better believe they're messy behind the scenes. Let's dive deeper. Remember that public appearance in New York? The one where Meghan was glowing, calm, collected. delivering her lines to the camera with purpose. Afterward, she told reporters how Harry had been pivotal in their advocacy direction. But back at the hotel that night, Harry hadn't even seen the prep notes for that event. He wasn't involved in the scripting. He was barely briefed. He was a shadow. Yet publicly, he was being credited, not as a partner, as a prop, a brand pillar, a figurehead of emotional support. But real support? That was supposed to come with involvement. And involvement was exactly what Harry was losing. Let's talk about the muzzle effect. Because this isn't just about omission. It's about misdirection. In public relations, muzzles are often disguised as key messaging. Stick to the talking points. Avoid specifics. Smile when you pivot. Redirect if the topic gets personal. Now imagine those rules being used on you by your own partner. That's what Harry felt. Every time he asked a question, he got a soft deflection. Don't worry, it's handled. We're in a good place. That's already being addressed. But who was handling it? Who was addressing it? Markus. Not by title, by influence. Let's revisit the megaphone metaphor. Once you see the motive, you realize every muzzle hides a megaphone. You start noticing the way silence is being weaponized. Not to hide, but to broadcast a cleaner message. And Harry was beginning to see it everywhere. Meghan's speeches began emphasizing empowerment, but only hers. Articles focused on trauma, but only hers. Even in the spare memoir process, he reportedly noticed suggestions, through ghostwriters or PR agents, that subtly repositioned certain moments to better match the overall Sussex story arc. And that arc made Meghan the heroine, made the palace the villain, and Harry, the supporting act, the sensitive defector, the forever +1 to the revolution. That's not partnership. That's casting. Now imagine the psychological toll that takes. You walk into a meeting about mental health advocacy. You speak from the heart. The team applauds. You feel seen. Then later, you read the draft press release, and your quotes are trimmed, polished, filtered, spun to align with her positioning. Suddenly, your mental health story becomes a validation tool for Meghan's activism. Your grief becomes a marketing beat, and you're sitting there wondering, when did my pain become part of the package? That's the crisis Harry was living in. And as the realization deepened, so did the silence. Not from Meghan, from him. Because what do you do when your voice has been co-opted? You go inward. You withdraw. You begin to watch. Carefully. And the more Harry watched, the more patterns he saw. Let's do a quick pattern breakdown. Press coverage framing Meghan as the strategic genius behind the brand. Frequent references to a close friend helping with decisions. Invitations to exclusive events coming through Markus's channels. Topics for interviews being cleared by third parties, not just PR firms, but trusted inner circle names. Again, allegations, not confirmed by the Sussexes. But patterns don't need confirmation to exist. They just need repetition. And repetition was the only language Harry started trusting. Now here's the emotional cliff. Harry didn't just feel replaced. He felt repackaged. Because while he stayed quiet, his image didn't. It kept appearing. In stories, photos, campaigns, statements. He was there, but only the version of him they needed. And the version he was becoming wasn't his. It was theirs. It was curated, controlled, muzzled. And all the while, someone else held the megaphone. He didn't know if it was Meghan, or Markus, or both, but he knew it wasn't him anymore. And for a man who gave up his titles to reclaim control, that was the deepest betrayal of all. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because Harry wasn't just a prince. He was also his mother's son. And Diana? She didn't go quietly. And neither would he. Because once a muzzle tightens, a reckoning begins. And Harry? He was about to pull the plug on the performance. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if you looked around and realized you weren't surrounded by people? You were surrounded by architects. Not of buildings. Of you. Of your choices. Your image. Your legacy. What if you thought you were building a life, only to realize someone else drew the blueprint and handed you the script after it was already written? That's where Prince Harry was, stuck between two worlds that mastered architecture in different ways. Hollywood, with its sleek entourages, and royalty, with its ancient engineers. But the truth was more disturbing, because the system that was scripting Harry's downfall didn't belong to either world. It belonged to the space between them. And Markus Anderson lived in that space. Let's step back. In Hollywood, An entourage keeps your world spinning. They book the cars, handle the stylists, field the emails, filter the requests, shape your calendar, your angles, and sometimes even your friendships. You don't have to think. You just have to perform. In royalty, you don't get an entourage. You get handlers, courtiers, equerries, press secretaries. They don't flatter. They correct. They don't follow you. You follow them. But what happens when you mix both? What happens when a royal marries a performer, and neither can tell who's actually driving anymore? You get chaos. You get confusion. You get control without fingerprints. And Markus Anderson? He may not have held a title, but he understood both languages. And according to multiple insiders, he spoke them fluently. Again, we're not asserting facts. We're piecing together whispers. But sometimes whispers, when stacked properly, form a blueprint. Let's look at the architecture. Markus didn't just show up in Meghan's life. He embedded. From Toronto to London, from Soho House lounges to Netflix boardrooms, he was described as the guy behind the curtain, the fixer, the access architect, the friend with no job title, but all the passwords. You don't need a title to run a machine. You just need access points. And Markus had them all. When Meghan wanted introductions, he gave them. When she needed privacy, he secured it. When the media needed a narrative, he helped draft the silent version, the one shaped by proximity, not press releases. Now fast forward. Harry marries Meghan, thinks he's escaping the palace system. But instead, he stepped into a new system, one just as controlling, but with no public face, no protocol, no accountability. And right at the center is Markus, not as a manipulator, but as a facilitator, a master at keeping the spotlight exactly where it serves his people, and nowhere else. Let's break the emotional twist. When Harry left the UK, he thought he was cutting the strings. But what he didn't realize was that strings still pull, even across oceans. They just change hands. And in Meghan's new world, the hand on the string wasn't a palace official. It was someone with designer shoes, an exclusive invite list, and a network thicker than bloodlines. Let me ask you, what's more powerful, birthright or access? What's harder to trace, heritage or narrative control? Because Harry had one, Markus had the other. And Meghan? She understood both. That's where the real dynamic lived. Because Meghan, for all her independent branding, knew something Harry didn't. Power doesn't come from who you are. It comes from who surrounds you when no one's looking. That's why she trusted Markus. Because he didn't just handle introductions. He curated influence. Let me give you a moment. Imagine you're Harry. You're sitting at a dinner party in Montecito. You're surrounded by producers, wellness executives, stylists, investors. They all smile. They all nod. They all say the right things. But as the night goes on, you notice something. They all defer. To Meghan? Yes. But more subtly, to Markus. They check with him. They quote his insights. They reference his recommendations for media contacts. And suddenly, it hits you. You're not at the head of the table. You're the draw, the headline, the security badge that got them in. But the real conversations are happening 2 feet to your left. And you weren't even invited to them. That's when the paranoia grows legs. Because now, everything feels orchestrated. The dinners, the panels, the red carpet placements. And when you try to speak up, you're met with that terrifying smile. You're overthinking. You're tired. Let's just enjoy the evening. But you can't. Because your instincts are screaming. This isn't just a friendship. It's a formation. It's not 2 people chatting over wine. It's an engine, and you're not in the driver's seat. That's when the walls start closing in. Let's not forget, Harry is not naive. He was raised in the most brutal PR machine on earth. He knows when messaging is being coordinated. He knows what it looks like when events are being staged to look natural. And that's exactly what Markus excelled at. Because every room Meghan walked into, Markus had already walked through first. Every headline about Meghan, Markus allegedly knew about it before Harry did. Again, allegations, rumors, but recurring ones. And when rumors repeat, they form patterns. And patterns are what Harry was trained to spot, even before he knew why he was spotting them. It's like this. If you keep finding fingerprints on the same doorknob, eventually, you stop asking how they got there. You ask why they never left. And Harry? He was done asking quietly. He wanted answers. But here's the danger. When you challenge an architecture built on silence, you don't get answers. You get deflection. You're too emotional. You're imagining things. Markus would never do that. And maybe that's true. Maybe Markus wasn't playing a game. Maybe he was just a friend. But Harry wasn't feeling like a husband anymore. He was feeling like an asset, a brand extension, an identity shield, the royal badge that gave Meghan's narrative legitimacy. And Markus might have been the one writing the mission statement. That realization didn't hit Harry all at once. It dripped. A quiet moment here. An overheard name there. A conversation paused the moment he walked in. But the drip turned into a storm the day he saw something in Meghan's calendar. Private sync with M.A. Archwell realignment. A sync? Without him? And realignment of what? Archwell was their joint legacy project. Or so he thought. Turns out, much of its new direction had been guided by third-party consultations, some of which, allegedly, included Markus. And Harry was informed after the fact. No wonder he felt erased. No wonder he pulled back. Because if a man walks into a kingdom where everyone bows, and then enters a brand where no one listens, eventually, he realizes he's not the king. He's just the logo. That's what was happening here. Harry wasn't losing his marriage. He was losing his position within it. And the architects were too skilled to let him see it happening until it was almost done. Let me ask you this. How do you fight a system that looks like friendship? How do you challenge strategy when it's disguised as support? The answer? You don't shout. You don't explode. You don't go nuclear. You go quiet. And Harry did. But not to retreat. To listen.